The human brain weighs about 3 pounds, but it holds the weight of a person's entire universe. As a neurosurgeon, I spent my life navigating the delicate white matter of the mind, believing that if I could fix the physical connections, I could fix the man. I was a fool. You can repair a ruptured aneurysm, but you cannot repair a rotted soul. My name is Dr. Elias Thorne, and for 10 years, I was the golden boy of Chicago's medical elite. I want you to close your eyes and imagine the pinnacle of success. I had the penthouse overlooking the lake, the respect of my peers, and a pair of hands that were insured for $5 million. I thought I was invincible. But the higher you climb, the thinner the air becomes, and the easier it is for someone to push you into the abyss. It was a cold Tuesday in November. I can still smell the antiseptic in operating room 4. It was supposed to be a routine procedure, as routine as brain surgery can be. The patient was Thomas Miller, Jr., the 22-year-old son of Senator Miller. A brilliant boy with a bright future, shadowed only by a persistent tremor in his left hand. A simple tumor, easily accessible. Or so I thought. Marcus Vane was my first assistant that day. Marcus wasn't just my colleague, he was the brother I never had. We had survived medical school together on caffeine and ambition. I had covered for him during his divorce, lent him money when his gambling debts got out of hand, and even advocated for his promotion when the board wanted to let him go. I trusted him with my life. That day, I trusted him with the senator's son. "He's stable, Elias," Marcus had whispered as we scrubbed in. His voice was calm, but now, looking back through the lens of a decade of agony, I realize his eyes were darting too much. He hadn't slept. During the 3rd hour of the surgery, I stepped back to consult the MRI scans on the digital monitor. It was a 30-second window. A mere 30 seconds where Marcus held the primary instrument. I heard it before I saw it. The sound of a suction line struggling to keep up with a sudden, massive flow of blood. The heart rate monitor shifted from a steady rhythmic beat to a frantic, high-pitched scream. What happened? I barked, rushing back to the table. Marcus was frozen. His hands, the hands I had trained, were hovering over the open skull, dripping with crimson. I don't know, he stammered. The wall of the artery it gave way. I didn't waste time questioning him. I dove in. For 6 hours, I fought. I bypassed the rupture, I managed the intracranial pressure, I gave that boy every ounce of my skill. But the damage was done. The lack of oxygen to the brain for those few critical minutes had been too much. Thomas Miller Jr. never woke up. In the medical world, a death like that is a catastrophe. When it's a senator's son, it's a political execution. The investigation started that evening. I expected the hospital to have my back. I expected Marcus to tell the truth. Instead, I walked into the Chief of Staff's office to find a team of lawyers and a stack of evidence that turned my world into a nightmare. "Elias," the Chief of Staff said, not looking me in the eye. "We found these in your locker." He pushed 3 vials of fentanyl and a half-empty bottle of scotch across the desk. My heart stopped. I hadn't touched a drop of alcohol in years, and I certainly hadn't stolen narcotics. "This is a mistake," I said, my voice trembling. "Check the cameras. Check the log. I can't stay silent anymore. You were impaired. I saw you take a hit from the vial before we scrubbed in." I stared at him, and for the first time in my life, I felt true, cold terror. It wasn't just a lie. It was a calculated, premeditated assassination of my character. Marcus had the board in his pocket because the hospital couldn't afford a malpractice suit against the institution. They needed a lone wolf to blame. A brilliant but broken surgeon who had finally snapped. The trial was a circus. Every nurse who had ever seen me look tired was coached to say I was unstable. Every patient I had ever lost, even the ones who were terminal, was brought forward as a victim of my negligence. And the senator used his entire weight to ensure I didn't just lose my license. He wanted me in a cage. I was sentenced to 12 years in a maximum security facility. The judge called me a betrayal to the white coat. As the bailiffs led me away, I turned to look at the gallery. Marcus was sitting next to Elena, my fiancée. She wasn't looking at me. She was holding his hand. That was the moment the Elias Thorne who saved lives died. The first night in prison, the silence is what gets you. It's not a quiet silence, it's a heavy, suffocating weight. I lay on a thin cot that smelled of urine and old iron, staring at the concrete ceiling. I began to transform. I realized that the hospital and the prison were the same, both were systems governed by power, secrets, and the exchange of favors. I started volunteering in the prison infirmary. The doctors there were bottom of the barrel, men who had lost their way or had nowhere else to go. They saw me as a threat until I saved a man's life during a stabbing in the cafeteria. I didn't have a surgical suite. I had a dirty table and a kit of dull instruments. But I did it. I performed a lateral thoracotomy with a steak knife and a piece of garden hose. When the man survived, the word spread. I wasn't the doctor anymore. I was the ghost. I began to trade medical favors for information. I treated the guard's chronic pain, I diagnosed the warden's silent heart condition, and in return, I got access to the one thing I needed, the library's computer. By the third year, my cell had become a laboratory of the mind. Most prisoners spend their time lifting weights or watching the clock, but I spent mine dissecting the past. I had a wall in my mind, a literal architectural map of St. Jude's Hospital, every corridor, every security camera, every ego-driven hierarchy. I knew that Marcus Vane would be rising. I knew that the hospital board would be covering their tracks. And I knew that to beat them, I had to become something they couldn't diagnose. It was during my 4th year that I met Silas. He was brought into the infirmary with what the prison doctor called indigestion. I took one look at the gray tint of his skin and the way he held his left shoulder, and I knew. His heart was failing, but not from old age. It was a blocked coronary artery that had been neglected for months. "You have 6 hours to live," I told him, standing over his bed while the guards were busy trading cigarettes in the hallway. Silas looked at me with eyes that had seen the birth and death of empires. He was 70, a man whose name once made the streets of South Chicago go quiet. "Then I guess I'll see you in hell, Doc," he wheezed. "Not today," I said. I didn't have a bypass machine. I didn't have a sterile field. What I had was a stash of high-grade anticoagulants I'd skimmed from the pharmacy over 6 months and a set of skills that the state of Illinois thought they had revoked. I performed a procedure that night that would have been headline news if it happened in a hospital. Using a modified catheter and sheer, desperate intuition, I cleared the blockage. When Silas woke up the next morning, he didn't thank me. He just looked at me and asked, "What's the price, Thorne?" "I don't want money," I said. "I want to know how to disappear while standing in the light. I want to know how to build a network out of people who don't exist. And I want to know everything you have on Marcus Vane." Silas smiled, a slow, predatory grin. "You're a surgeon, Elias. You look at the body. I look at the strings. If you want to ruin a man like Vane, you don't hit his heart. You hit his shadow." For the next 6 years, Silas became my professor in the dark arts of influence. Every day in the yard, while others talked about sports or parole, Silas taught me the anatomy of the street. He taught me that every man has a price, but it's rarely money. For some, it's a secret. For others, it's the fear of being seen for who they truly are. I began to build my ghost network. Through Silas's outside contacts, I started small. I used the prison's computer lab, nominally for legal research, to track the digital footprints of St. Jude's financial department. I found the nurse, Sarah. I didn't just find her address, I found her secrets. I found that she hadn't just taken a bribe, she had a daughter with a rare neurological condition. The pension Marcus gave her was paying for the girl's treatment. It was a golden cage. You see, Elias? Silas would whisper during our walks. He didn't just buy her silence. He bought her motherhood. That's a strong knife. If you want to untie it, you need a sharper blade than a scalpel. I spent months studying the hospital's insurance contracts. I realized that the payout for the senator's son's death didn't come from the hospital's main fund. It came from a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. That was the smoking gun. It meant the hospital knew the malpractice was systemic, not isolated. They weren't just protecting Marcus, they were protecting a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. Meanwhile, I watched Marcus from afar. Every magazine in the library that featured him was a textbook for me. I studied the way he held his hands in photos. I noticed the subtle change in his posture over the years. By year 7, I saw it, a slight, almost imperceptible tilt of his head when he spoke. A sign of vestibular issues. Most people would miss it. But I had spent a decade looking for flaws. He was aging poorly. The stress of the lie was eating him from the inside out. He's brittle, Silas, I said one afternoon. Brittle is good, Silas replied. Brittle things don't bend. They shatter. In the 9th year, the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. Silas's people on the outside intercepted a series of encrypted emails between Marcus and a pharmaceutical representative. Marcus was taking an experimental drug to suppress tremors, a drug that hadn't been FDA approved for human use. He was experimenting on himself just to stay in the game. I had everything. I had the motive, the fraud, and the current instability of the man who stole my life. But then, the news hit the prison television. Marcus Vane had been selected to perform a revolutionary robotic surgery on the senator's daughter. The same senator whose son had died under my care. It was the ultimate PR move. A full-circle moment of healing for the city. I sat in the mess hall, watching Marcus's face on the screen. He looked like a god. He was standing next to Elena, who was now the hospital's lead philanthropist. They were the power couple of Chicago. I felt a surge of cold, white-hot fury, but I didn't let it show. I just looked at my hands. They were steady. Steadier than they had ever been in that operating room 10 years ago. It's time, Silas, I said that night through the bars of my cell. The parole board meets tomorrow, Elias, Silas whispered from the darkness of the neighboring cell. The evidence we planted about the lead investigator's corruption, it's already in the hands of the right people. You won't just walk out of here. You'll walk out as a martyr. The next morning, for the first time in 10 years, I put on a suit. It was cheap, ill-fitting, and smelled of mothballs, but it didn't matter. I walked out of those gates not as a disgraced doctor, but as a man who had spent a decade studying the art of the kill. I didn't go to a hotel. I went to a small, damp basement that Silas had prepared for me. On the wall was a map of the hospital. But this time, it wasn't a map of the building. It was a map of the surgery. I had 48 hours. I spent the first 12 hours reaching out to the invisible staff I had mapped out. The janitors who were Silas's cousins. The IT technicians who owed Silas gambling debts. The security guards whose mortgages were being paid by anonymous donors. By the end of the first day, I didn't just have access to the hospital. I owned the hospital's nervous system. I visited Sarah that night. Not in her trailer, but at the hospital where she was visiting her daughter. She saw me in the cafeteria, and the coffee cup in her hand shattered on the floor. "Elias," she whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of 10 years of guilt. "Hello, Sarah," I said, my voice as calm as a steady heartbeat. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to give you a chance to be the nurse you were supposed to be. I'm here to offer your daughter a real future. But first, we need to talk about that meeting in the boardroom. The one you recorded." She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw hope in her eyes. "I thought you were dead," she said. "The man you knew is dead," I replied. "But the man standing in front of you has a lot of work to do. And I need my first assistant." The 24 hours before a major surgery are always the quietest. In the medical world, it's called the preoperative lull. The patient is prepped, the instruments are sterilized, and the surgeon tries to find a center of gravity. But for Marcus Vane, there was no center. There was only a crumbling edge. I spent that night in my basement sanctuary, watching the hospital through 1,000 digital eyes. Thanks to the IT backdoors Silas's people had installed, I could see the telemetry from the robotic surgical suite. I could see the guest list for the observation gallery. And most importantly, I could see Marcus. He was in his office at 2 a.m. The high-definition camera I'd tapped into showed every bead of sweat on his forehead. He was opening a small, unmarked plastic bottle. He took 2 pills, then 3. The experimental tremor suppressants. I watched as he held his hand out in front of him. It was still for a moment, then it jerked, a violent, neurological protest against the chemicals he was forcing into his bloodstream. "You're pushing the system too hard, Marcus," I whispered to the monitor. "Even a machine has a breaking point." I felt a strange sensation then. It wasn't joy. It wasn't the hot rush of anger I'd felt in my cell. It was something clinical. I was observing the pathology of a man's downfall. I began to write in my journal, a habit I'd picked up in prison. I wrote about the difference between a doctor and a predator. A doctor sees a body as a temple to be preserved. A predator sees it as a resource to be exploited. At 4 a.m., I made my move. I didn't head to the hospital yet. I went to a quiet, upscale suburb to the home of the hospital's chief of staff, Dr. Holloway, the man who had handed me those vials in his office 10 years ago. Holloway was an old man now, living in a house built on the silence of victims. I didn't break in. I walked to his front door and rang the bell. When he opened it, clutching a silk robe around his frail frame, he looked at me and didn't recognize me at first. I was just a man in a dark coat. "Dr. Holloway," I said. "I believe you have something of mine. 10 years of my life." His eyes widened. The recognition hit him like a physical blow. He tried to slam the door, but I placed my hand against it. My hands were stronger than his. "I'm not here to hurt you," I said, my voice low and steady. "I'm here to offer you a seat in the gallery today. I want you to watch the legacy you created. I want you to see what happens when you build a hospital on a foundation of lies." I handed him a tablet. On the screen was the evidence of the Cayman Island shell accounts Silas had unearthed. Holloway's face went the color of bone. He knew that this didn't just mean the end of his career, it meant the end of his freedom. "You have a choice, Arthur," I called him by his first name for the first time. "You can call the police now, and we can start the trial for your racketeering and fraud today. Or, you can go to that surgery, and when the moment comes, you can tell the senator the truth. Maybe, just maybe, he'll show you more mercy than you showed me. I left him trembling in his doorway. I didn't need his answer. I had already planted the seed of fear. Fear is a powerful stimulant. It would ensure he was in that room, watching his world burn. By 7 a.m., the hospital was buzzing. This was the gala of medicine. The senator's daughter, a beautiful girl who looked far too much like her late brother, was being wheeled toward the suite. The senator was there, his face a mask of grief and hope. He truly believed Marcus Vane was his savior. It was the ultimate irony. The man who broke the sun was being trusted to fix the daughter. I entered the building through the loading dock. A janitor named Jorge, whose son I had diagnosed with a rare heart defect via a smuggled letter from prison, handed me a keycard and a technician's jacket. "He is in room 602, doctor," Jorge whispered. "Security is light on the technical floor. Everyone is focused on the cameras." I made my way to the server room directly behind the surgical theater. This was the heart of the ghost in the machine. The robotic surgery system, the Da Vinci She, relied on a complex network of fiber optics and real-time data processing. It was designed to be unhackable. But every system has a manual override for emergencies. And every manual override has a physical interface. I sat down at the terminal and began the final calibration. I wasn't just going to watch. I was going to be the silent partner in this surgery. I looked at the clock. 8:55 a.m. 5 minutes until the first incision. I opened a secure line to Sarah, who was stationed in the recovery ward. "Are you ready?" I asked. "I have the senator's private line," she said, her voice shaking but determined. "And I have the recording queued up." "Elias, are you sure about this? If the surgery goes wrong..." "The surgery won't go wrong, Sarah," I said, looking at the surgical blueprints. "I'm not Marcus. I don't let my patients die to satisfy my ego. I'm going to save that girl. And in doing so, I'm going to destroy the man who thought he could play God." I watched the screen as Marcus walked into the OR. He looked at the gallery, gave a confident nod to the cameras, and took his seat at the console. He looked like a king. But as he reached for the controls, I saw it. The tremor. A tiny, microscopic vibration in his index finger. "Welcome to the table, Marcus," I whispered. "Let's see how you handle a real complication." At 9 a.m. sharp, the red light above the door of operating room 4 began to glow. To the millions watching at home, this was a miracle of modern science. To me, it was an autopsy of a living man's reputation. Marcus Vane sat at the robotic console, his head tucked into the 3D viewer like a priest at a confessional. The Da Vinci robot stood over the senator's daughter, its 4 metallic arms draped in sterile plastic, looking like a giant silver spider. "Scalpel to arm 1, Marcus commanded." His voice was steady, but the sensors on my monitor told a different story. His heart rate was 110 beats per minute. He was sweating. The suppressants were fighting a war against his adrenaline. I waited. The first incision is always the easiest. It's the deep work, the navigation through the narrow canyons of the heart's vessels, where a man's true skill is tested. As Marcus guided the robotic needle toward the girl's pericardium, I tapped into his private audio feed. "You're over-rotating the wrist, Marcus," I whispered. Marcus stiffened. He jerked the controls, and the robotic arm on the screen twitched. It was a movement of only a few millimeters, but in heart surgery, a millimeter is a mile. "Who is this?" Marcus hissed, his voice barely a whisper, hoping the microphones in the room wouldn't catch it. "A ghost from room 4, I replied. "Focus on the artery, Marcus. You're coming in too steep. Just like you did 10 years ago with the senator's son." Do you remember the sound of the rupture? The way the blood filled the cavity so fast the suction couldn't keep up. Shut up, Marcus muttered. The surgical assistants looked at him, confused. Is everything all right, Dr. Vane? One of the nurses asked. Fine, he snapped. The headset, it's just some interference. Get me a clean channel. I watched him try to reset his focus. But I was the interference. I wasn't just in his ear, I was in the code. Every time he moved the master controls, I introduced a micro delay. A half-second lag. It's the most frustrating thing for a surgeon, the feeling that your hands are no longer your own. In the observation gallery, I saw Dr. Holloway and the senator sitting side by side. Holloway looked like a man watching his own execution. The senator was leaning forward, his eyes fixed on the large monitors. Now, Sarah, I signaled through my secondary device. In the gallery, the senator's phone buzzed. It wasn't a call. It was a push notification to his secure email, labeled, "The Truth About Thomas Miller, Jr." I watched the senator's hand reach into his pocket. I watched him open the file. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I saw his shoulders tense. I saw him turn his head slowly toward Dr. Holloway. The poison was starting to work. Back in the OR, Marcus was reaching the critical phase. He had to detach the damaged valve. This was the moment where he needed absolute precision. His hands were shaking now, a fine tremor that the robot's software was struggling to filter out. The lag. Marcus gasped. The system is lagging. Technicians, check the fiber line. The line is clear, doctor, the tech replied from the corner of the room. Everything is green on our end. It's not the machine, Marcus, I whispered into his ear. It's your conscience. It's getting heavy, isn't it? The weight of all those lies, the weight of a boy's life, the weight of Elena's betrayal. It's all flowing into your fingertips. Stop it. Marcus shouted, his voice echoing in the sterile room. He let go of the controls and stood up, his face flushed. The robotic arms froze in mid-air, centimeters away from the girl's heart. The gallery erupted in muffled whispers. The senator stood up, his eyes burning with a dark, cold fury. He wasn't looking at the surgery anymore. He was looking at Marcus as if he were a specimen under a microscope. Dr. Vane, the head nurse asked, her voice filled with alarm. The patient is on bypass. We need to proceed. Marcus looked at the cameras. He looked at the gallery. He saw the senator holding his phone, his face a mask of absolute hatred. Marcus knew. In that single moment of eye contact, he realized that the fortress he had built was not a sanctuary, but a tomb. I can't, Marcus whispered. This was my moment. I didn't want the girl to die. I am a doctor, regardless of what the state says. I bypassed the main security wall and took full remote control of the Da Vinci system from my basement terminal. On the monitors in the OR, the robotic arms began to move again. But Marcus wasn't touching the controls. He was standing 3 feet away from the console, his hands trembling at his sides. The room went dead silent. The observers watched in frozen awe as the robotic arms performed a series of movements so fluid, so precise, that they seemed almost supernatural. I was operating from a mile away, through a hacked satellite link, and I was doing it better than Marcus Vane had ever done in his prime. Who is operating? The senator's voice boomed over the intercom. I opened the public address system in the OR. My voice filled the room, calm and resonant. The man you buried, I said. The man who actually knows how to save a life. Dr. Elias Thorne. I finished the valve replacement in record time. Each stitch was a signature. Each movement was a reclaim of my dignity. When the last suture was tied, I felt a weight lift off my chest that had been there for 10 years. I locked the system and looked at the camera. She's stable, Senator. Your daughter will live. But your hospital is terminal. I disconnected the link. I stood up from my terminal and began to pack my few belongings. The sirens were already approaching the hospital. I could hear them in the distance. The recording Sarah sent was already trending on every news site in Chicago. The financial records Holloway had were being uploaded to the FBI's tip portal. Marcus Vane was being restrained by hospital security, a man who had finally lost everything: his career, his freedom, and his mind. I walked out of that basement into the cool evening air of Chicago. The city didn't look different, but I was a different man. The weight of the scalpel was gone. The ghost was finally at peace. People often ask what happens after the villain is defeated. They want the credits to roll, they want a neat ending. The collapse of St. Jude's was spectacular. Within a month, the hospital was placed under federal receivership. Dr. Holloway, the man who thought his silk robes would protect him, was the first to strike a deal. He gave up everything: names, dates, account numbers. He died in a minimum security prison 2 years later, alone, clutching a picture of the hospital he had helped destroy. Marcus Vane. Marcus didn't have the strength for a trial. The experimental drugs had done their work. His nervous system was a scorched field. They found him in his penthouse a week after the surgery, staring at his hands, trying to command them to stop shaking. He spent the rest of his days in a state-run psychiatric facility. I heard that he tells the orderlies he's still the head of neurosurgery, but they just nod and give him his medication. He is trapped in a loop of his own failure, counting the seconds until a surgery that will never end. And Elena, who chose the winner instead of the truth. She lost the wealth, the status, and the man she thought she loved. She moved to a small town in the Midwest, working in a library, invisible to the world. Sometimes I wonder if she thinks of me when she sees the rain against the window. But then I realize, it doesn't matter. She was never the prize. She was just another casualty of her own ambition. I didn't take a cent from the foundation I set up. I took only what was mine, my name. I spent the next year traveling. No luxury hotels, no first-class flights. I walked the streets of cities where nobody knew me as Dr. Elias Thorne or as a convict. I watched people. I watched the way they treated those beneath them. I learned more about humanity in a year of silence than I did in 20 years of surgery. I realized that we are all surgeons in our own way. Every day, we make incisions in the lives of others. We either cut to heal, or we cut to take. And the most dangerous instrument isn't a scalpel or a robotic arm, it's the tongue. A single word can be a suture that holds a heart together, or a blade that opens a wound that never closes. Today, I live on the coast of Maine. I have a small workshop where I restore old wooden boats. It's slow work. It's honest work. Wood doesn't have an ego. It doesn't try to bribe you or frame you. It just reacts to the way you treat it. If you are patient, it becomes beautiful. If you are reckless, it breaks. Sometimes, late at night, I look at my hands. They are scarred, they are weathered, but they are still. I think about the senator's daughter. She sent me a letter a year ago. She's studying to be a doctor now. She said she wants to be the kind of surgeon who doesn't just fix bodies, but protects the truth. That letter is the only trophy I kept. If you're listening to this, and you feel like the world has buried you alive, I want you to remember my story. Don't fight the dirt. Don't scream at the darkness. Use the time. Map the shadows. Learn the anatomy of the people who think they own you. Because no matter how thick the walls are, or how deep the cage is, the truth is like water. It always finds the smallest crack. And when it does, the whole dam will break. My father was right about the silence of a poor man and the power of a rich man. Stay steady. Stay patient. And remember, the best surgery is the one that removes the poison without killing the patient. I removed my poison. And for the first time in 10 years, I am breathing clean air.